this book is intended for us, for white progressives who so often, despite our conscious intentions, make life so difficult for people of color. I believe that white progressives cause the most daily damage to people of color. And none of the white people that I identify, whose actions I describe in this book, would identify as racist. In fact, I think they would most likely identify as racially progressive and vehemently deny any complicity with racism. Yet all of their responses illustrate white fragility and how it holds racism in place. These responses spur the daily frustrations and indignities people of color endure from white people who see themselves as open-minded and thus not racist. And I define a white progressive as any white person who thinks he or she is not racist, or is less racist, or is in the choir, or already gets it. White progressives can be the most difficult for people of color because to the degree that we think we have it, we're going to put all of our energy into making sure you think that we have it, and none of it into what we need to be doing for the rest of our lives, right? White progressives do indeed uphold and perpetrate racism, but our defensiveness and certitude make it virtually impossible to explain to us how we do so. When I first applied to be that diversity trainer back in the early 90s, I thought, well, of course I'm qualified to lead discussions on racism. I'm a vegetarian. How could I be racist? Now, I would need to be vegan today, but you know, in the 90s, that was pretty alternative, right? I even got called a communist once when I said, no, I'm a vegetarian.
But if we want to be successful, if we want to achieve animal liberation, we can't divorce it from Black liberation.
And let me just say that, you know, I love Seattle, and everything I learned about white fragility, I learned here working with white progressives. I have had to understand not just the collective dynamics and dimensions of racism, but how racism impacts different groups who are perceived and defined as people of color, how it impacts them differently.
First, I want to say that racism doesn't exist. It's an illusion. What do you say about that?
I say that's silly.
You say that's silly?
Yes, sir.
Why do you say it's silly?
Well, I've been called names enough to know that racism exists.
But that could be because they just hated you. They made a judgment and they hate you, not because you're color, they just hate you.
But after a good 20 plus years of talking day in and day out to white people about racism, I feel very confident to say that there is something profoundly anti-Black in this culture. And none of the white people that I identify, whose actions I describe in this book, would identify as racist. In fact, I think they would most likely identify as racially progressive and vehemently deny any complicity with racism. We obscure the system of racism that we uphold, and we exempt ourselves from its forces. Right? And we do this in a way that appears to be progressive, right? That race doesn't matter to us.
Every woman, he wrote in 1920, must have the right of procreation at her own discretion. And today, Black women exercise that precious right at a rate far exceeding their percentage in the population.
Can I just say this now that you guys are loosening me up here? When you laugh at my jokes, I'm going to keep getting looser and looser. Damn white people are pissy about racism.
Ain't Jemima? Jemima? What she do? Why y'all getting rid of her? She didn't do nothing. If they get rid of Aunt Jemima, I'm not eating pancakes no more.
We are so pissy on this topic. We're mean on this topic, right?
You're fucking a white male! You're a white male!
And you stop it! You are a white male! You
true.
stop it! You are a white male! Your skin is light enough! Stop it!
I gotta let...
So aversive racism is a form of what sociologists call new racism, right? And so it's racism that progressive whites are most likely to hold, but because it conflicts with our identities as good people, we're most likely to be in denial about it. So say, when I do a caucus group or something and the white people are afraid I might think they're racist, I think you're racist. I do. Because I think I am too, right? But let's be done with that. So if you're a person of color scratching your head thinking, how can they not see this? Like, I just don't believe they don't see this. We actually really don't see it. Oh, and hell yes, we know it. And we do see it, but we cannot admit that. Both these things are actually true. We don't see it and we do see it, but can't admit to it. And it's part of what makes us so irrational.
YouTube, what up, man? I've been trying to tell y'all about these progressives, man. And this is where all the real racism is coming from. How can you be an openly admitted racist, but you're out here teaching all these anti-racism courses? You're like the darling of anti-racism. This shit doesn't fucking make sense. And you gotta check this last part out. I don't think it's racist. It's just funny as hell.
Consider a conversation I had with a white friend. She was telling me about a white couple who she knew who had just moved to New Orleans and bought a house for a mere $25,000. Of course, she immediately added, they also had to buy a gun, and Joan is afraid to leave the house. I immediately knew they had bought a home in a black neighborhood.